future of work. What are the challenges and opportunities for manufacturing, transport, and service sector jobs? There are some who argue that millions of jobs could change or disappear in the coming decades. What do we do about that? What do we do about the gig economy, about informal workers? What's the future of these informal workers, of these people who are doing gig economy? What impact that automation technology like artificial intelligence and robotics will have on jobs, skills, and wages? And we've seen different movements, different strike movements recently. What does that portend about the future of work? We've got protests in Canada about wanting collective bargaining, a postal strike, support by other government employees. In Ireland, we see a strike. Management have breached collective agreements which they freely entered into with their workers. We see various movements on that. Christy Hoffman, are you wired up and ready? Okay. Make sure you got it.
Let's check.
So you can use a hand mic.
What? Have the microphone on. All right, there you go.
Let me start with you, Christy.
Okay.
On Black Friday, there was a strike, right, by Amazon workers and protests. And I saw the banners saying, "We are not robots." Thank you very much. And you said that Amazon's refusal to negotiate with unions is not only a violation of workers' rights, it is dangerous. For those of you watching virtually and those in the audience, if you want to comment, let us know. Hashtag ITUC 2018. What do you mean by dangerous?
What I mean by dangerous? Well, just on the question of the bargaining, we see all kinds of health and safety issues, dangers presented for Amazon workers. When we looked at, I think the GMB, which is the UK union, organizing Amazon workers, said there's 600 visits of an ambulance to the Amazon facilities in that country.
Really?
But I think more broadly on Amazon, so there are the really brutal conditions for the workers, and they're not organized in the U.S. They're a little bit organized in Europe, but even where they are organized, the company, the company really doesn't want to bargain with the workers. They're trying to use their U.S.-style tactics in Europe. I think the bigger question is what Sharon said this morning about breaking up Amazon, because this is a company that the power and size of Amazon has the threat to really disrupt all of our industries. I think the experts assess that Amazon could take over any industry in 2 to 3 years. And we see this across beyond the question of their own workers in fulfillment. We're looking at their impact in post, in media, in IT, and across the entire commerce industry. So I'll stop there.
Oh, outside of the U.S., where do you see that? As General Secretary of Uni Global Union and millions, I think hundreds of millions of workers around the world, what's another example like Amazon elsewhere?
Well, Amazon is really special as far as the power it has to disrupt our bargaining relationships and to disrupt industries. There's a lot of bad employers out there. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of employers that won't bargain with workers.
You're going to vote on worst employer, I think.
Yeah, we're going to vote on worst employer, and we're kind of pulling for Amazon, but there's some really other really bad guys on that list, so I'm sympathetic to some of the other bad ones. But I think Amazon is not just a bad employer. It's the size and their monopoly power and their ownership and control of data for so many people in the world that gives them an outsized power, which is why we say, look, let's break up Amazon and take them back to size.
All right. Now, there is there are little bits of progress, too. Steve Cotton, General Secretary of International Transport Workers Federation. Steve, there was a regional meeting of Asia's leading seafaring nations that highlighted the plight of many seafarers that they face in the event of maritime accidents. And there are ILO guidelines on the fair treatment of seafarers. There was an agreement in Manila on actually making this work. I think you were quoted here saying, now the hard work begins. We must create an implementation plan. We have to make it work. Give us a progress report.
So, well, I think thanks for the opportunity to be here with you and be on this panel. I think for us in the ITF, we historically have a very strong maritime reputation. And the guidelines that we were working on in Manila come from working in collaboration with governments and employers. I know it's a bit of a controversial issue here this week, but the reality is the ITF in the transport sector has to do business with the Maersks, the MSCs, the DP Worlds of players of the world. And we know for seafarers the challenge has been what we would describe as fair treatment. So they're probably, whilst we have a lot unionised, particularly in our Flag of Convenience campaign where we fight for their rights, they are migrant workers who show up in new opportunities. And
I might interject that on Equal Times, the news part of ITUC, there are a lot of very interesting stories about how people working on ships, the plight, the hardship that they face is unbelievable.
I think for the ITF, we've been running a campaign for 70 years for seafarers, but it's a combination of dockers and seafarers. And when we talk implementation, it's about making sure that we're able to secure them trade union rights, working with governments, because predominantly it's Global South that provides the labour in shipping.
Absolutely.
And we need to make sure that whether you're a seafarer Filipino that shows up in North America in a kind of crisis situation with the authorities all over you, can you get your rights protected? Do they know what their rights are? The first question. But then also if you imagine Chinese seafarers going to India, all of those dynamics. So our challenge is to get governments to expand their strategy, but with the human element, understanding that unions have a voice, and probably we know better the issues that those seafarers face.
So you've got that in agreement, but you've got to put it into action, or implementation, as we say in the policy-making bubble. Put it into action, and I guess the next step is what? You've got to talk to governments.
Well, I think we're very proud about what happened, and, you know, I was being slightly facetious when I talk about relationships with government and multinationals, but in order to get some of the governments we're talking about to move, you do need to bring the industry argument to that place.
Which ones? Can we name and shame right now?
I think on name and shame on companies, we tend to target substandard registers and flags. So we are looking at some national flags that give us some challenges.
Panama?
Panama is actually one of the countries which is next in line. They have offered to host a regional challenge to us about whether what we've achieved in Asia Pacific can be brought to Latin America.
So there's a willingness there.
Which is a very interesting movement on their part. And we have a number of projects in Panama, which I'm going to take the opportunity to promote. The canal, we're having a lot of challenges with the canal. The canal was expanded, but they didn't put the infrastructure in place. So their capital plan was good, but their implementation plan was weak.
Okay.
Not enough seafarers operating on those canals, the pilots, the engine to deliver the job. And Panama is one of those areas where it's a major regional hub, and we're targeting that for all transport modes. And we see DHL and Amazon and all of those players wanting to control that as a hub.
Okay, so you heard it here. Hashtag ITUC 2018. Let's make some more news. Walter Sanchez, General Secretary of Industrial. Welcome.
Thank you.
I see another ray of hope when it comes to the textile industry after that horrible, fatal collapse of a building, the Rana Plaza building, that I hope we all know. Unless you're living in a cave, you should know about that. More than 1,100 people killed in that one textile factory accident. And now we see a willingness here. Unions representing Bangladeshi textile workers have reached a landmark $2.3 million settlement with a multinational apparel brand, I don't know if you can name it, after it was accused of delays in remedying life-threatening hazards at its factories. But this is what mystifies me is that money, $2 million, goes to fix, I think, 150 factories?
Yeah.
$2 million?
Yeah.
That sounds like chump change to me, but I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I think, first of all, thank you for being in this panel. And of course, that was not an accident. That was an assassination, I would say. That was a killing because there was avoidance of lots of warnings
Yeah.
that were made before. And then after that, we put together what we call Accord on Fire and Safety Building. Since then, we could reduce almost to zero the fatal accidents in Bangladesh factory of garment. But this settlement was exactly because some brands that were bound by this accord, they were not filling their responsibilities over their suppliers.
Right.
But these 2 million settlement, it's not a big money here, but in Bangladesh it means a lot.
Krista, you called this a groundbreaking agreement. Why do you say so? Even though to me it doesn't sound like much money to fix 150 factories. Or what do you
First of all, the fact that we, in the Bangladesh Accord, which is a joint agreement with Industrial and Uni and the various brands, we held them to account through an arbitration process, which hasn't really happened before.
So this is a precedent. This is a step.
So from that point of view,
right?
having an enforceable agreement, you have to remember when we started this process, the brand said, well, that's not really true, that it's enforceable, and the arbitration panel will never accept it, and we won every procedural battle. Yes, this agreement is subject to arbitration. Yes, we can enforce it. Yes, we did bring a valid case, and then to realize that they had to pay. And remember, it's not the brand's responsibility to pay for all of remediation. It's their responsibility to pay when the factory can't afford it. So it was never intended that the brands would pay for everything.
Okay.
So this is a really important amount of money that can be used to leverage other monies from the factories. It'll probably be some kind of sharing formula, right?
I see
so
that.
I think it's really the fact that we won an arbitration case is groundbreaking and historic, and the fact that 2 million is not anything to sneeze at in Bangladesh.
This also, part of the agreement was to give $300,000 to two unions, Industrial and Uniglobal, so your two unions, to fund your joint supply chain worker support fund, an initiative. Well, you explain it. One of you, Steve, go ahead. How do you explain that? What does that support fund do? Not Steve, sorry.
I think if Walter first go.
I'm getting it mixed up. Walter, sorry.
Actually, we constituted this fund exactly to help us in future cases like this. So we're trying to use this money to, for example, to get us legal advice to really make all of others global agreements, because we don't have this one global agreements. I think Uni has about over 50. We have 49 global framework agreements with multinationals all over the world. They are responsible also for their supply chains in various sectors, and we want to make all of them be enforceable and be bound.
So let me swerve back into the actual theme of this, which is the future of work. But I think these two agreements can have bearing on the future of work, the challenges and opportunities for manufacturing, transport, and service sector jobs. What does this agreement portend on the future of work in the transport industry? Steve.
Okay, so for me, it's a little bit. So we support the agreement and we support the great work our colleagues from the other GUFs have been doing, but it's ultimately who's accountable, and that's the conversation all the way through the supply chain, and then a conversation about what does the future of work look like.
Yeah.
So we see the Amazon is basically to tag you and count how many hours and how many kilometres or miles you walk to do a product test about how efficient human beings are. Our view is that we want to partner with the other GUFs about the global supply chain, either under the ILO and or more industrially.
That's very tricky, because a lot of people in the supply chain say, oh, it's not my thing. I'm not responsible for that. It's the other guy in the supply chain.
We've got some examples in trucking, which has got terrible levels of subcontracting. In one of the projects we worked with Uni, we identified up to 20 levels of subcontracting.
There you
but
go.
If you're a brand and you say you have a corporate
responsibility,
you have a corporate social responsibility mandate policy, can you really be accountable for 20 levels of subcontracting? And we say, no, you can't. And many of the brands themselves are coming to recognise that the model of subcontracting everything out comes with absolute risk.
It does.
And we see from
And
the Rana Plaza strategy that we have to identify where they're breaching not international standards, on many occasions national standards,
Right.
and highlight that, and or work with them to deliver a solution.
Christy, future of work regarding these agreements. Christy, what do you see that bearing on, how they bear on the future of work? And you can go wider on this.
Well, look, I mean, I think this question of corporate responsibility and how do we take this ahead and what's a meaningful assessment of responsibility and how do we enforce that? Because if we don't have an enforceable model, it's not going to work. And we've learned that time and time again. You have the voluntary CSR, it just doesn't work. It's really dead. And we're trying to create a new model where global unions play a really important role to be in the focus question of corporate responsibility all across the globe.
That's
So
the
this
only way you're
question
going to
of-
enforce it through that supply chain is with a global organization, right?
Well, it's not only supply chain. I think there's one thing that I definitely care about the supply chain. It's critical. But let's just even look at the direct employees of some of these corporations. And we're dealing, just to throw one out, because I know you wanted me to put out a name before, but Teleperformance, for example, 400,000 workers, 60 countries. Vast majority of those workers don't have a fair shot at getting a union because they'll be fired or dismissed, or their governments won't enforce the laws that protect their right to organize. We want a global agreement so we can actually do that job. So we can also, it's not only for we absolutely, the supply chain, the transport, the production is critical, but even direct employees of many, many companies don't have the right to have a union.
Okay, and then you and I discussed this before the panel about the future of work, the gig economy, and you believe that that's important, but it's kind of just a part of what that future of work's got to be. How do you see the future of work?
I think the gig economy is a little bit too much of a slogan that's used to distract us from some of the core issues around the kinds of jobs that have been created, especially since the financial crisis. We look at the stats, 95%, 94% in the US, 90-some in Europe, of the new jobs created since 2008 have been so-called non-standard. So not a full-time permanent job, but some other, whether it's agency, part-time contract, short-term contract. And this isn't all related to digitalization. This is sort of let's use digitalization. That train left the station. That's going to happen no matter what. And just kind of jump on that train and package all the new jobs under that heading. And I think we have to really care about protecting an employment relationship, the millions of so-called self-employed. That's a big crisis. That's a huge crisis, which touches on the platform economy, but it goes way beyond that. It's in many industries.
Steve, I see you nodding there.
Yeah, no, I think for us, we kind of want to bust the myth about the future of work the way it's been described. We believe, certainly in transport, there's a challenge by the product placers, so the manufacturers, to scare the workers to become even more vulnerable in the debate. And we would go back to our roots on this, that basically, particularly women and youth, if you look at the research, run the biggest risk. So we want to go back to unionising, organising, campaigning against automation. And if there is automation, we want benefits and education and opportunity for the workers. Because at the moment, the agenda is being driven by the manufacturers, not government, by manufacturers who want to place and create new markets. And I echo Christy's words about it's a misrepresentation of the reality.
Okay. Walter, do you want to add to that, possibly? Okay.
Well, actually, I would just like to add that, when we talk about future of works, and maybe it's a present of work, it's not future, it's already taking place. For us, it's nothing new, transformation. In our generation, we went through another industrial revolution, and it's nothing new for us. So it's just new management techniques attached to it. So, of course, with the development of digitalization, it gives us speed in the transformation. But the question is management decisions that creates this kind of non-standard jobs, to say the least, but almost precarious.
Yeah.
And then it changed the process of production and the products. Of course, they change. There will be companies and sectors that will be entirely banned from economy. They will be replaced by others. But the question is that the jobs that are being created, so they are normally created in development industries, for example, that are part-time, that are home-based, that are subcontracted.
Then what's your strategy to organize those kinds of
That's the
people
key
who
question
those
that
kinds
I
of
think
workers?
that's a lot of things that the unions must be
tricky.
unions 4.0 as well.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
especially when we get stricted, and this is something that we're discussing a lot with our affiliates, is that the model of unionism based on sectors is not sustainable. Because, for example, take one question about the energy transition. A worker that works in power generation, thermal power generation from oil and gas or coal, when this energy goes to renewables, so this kind of job disappears. But there will be other jobs generated in production of solar panels and turbines and everything, but they are not energy workers. So if we stick to the sectors-based thing, we cannot organize the new sectors. So that's so I always mention the examples of amalgamated unions, merged unions that don't have a clear sector-based. So that's our part that we have to transform ourselves.
Ricky, yeah. We have a question here. Please identify yourself.
Thank you. I'm Riaz from Mauritius. I'm the president of the Confederation of Private Sector Workers. My question, much has been said about digitalization of the economy. But when you see the trickle-down effects of this digitalization, it's not only about losing jobs. It's also about quality of jobs.
Yeah.
In my country, workers are under e-surveillance. You imagine now, at midnight, the boss can remove his cell phone and see what the worker is doing. Oh, you're remaining idle. So we are like prisoners now. But not on this issue, trade unions are still silent. So what's your opinion about it?
Christy, go ahead.
I mean, look, it all comes back to bargaining, in my opinion. I think that this question of surveillance, there is the capacity now technologically to surveil and monitor far more than in the past. So that's the job of unions, is to negotiate over that. Just like we would have negotiated 30 years ago about what's just cause discipline. I mean, I think negotiating and organizing around surveillance and monitoring, it's a big issue. It's a big issue in across many of our industries. Just take call centers, for example, where every single call you have is monitored and assessed. This is why we need unions. I come out of manufacturing originally, and I remember, and I think, Walter's got the right point. It's nothing new. When we had new technology in the 80s, we put in our collective agreement, you got to negotiate with the union about the impact of introducing new technology to the workplace. That's the same as we need today, but across all industries, and those that haven't traditionally had to negotiate over those issues. And surveillance is a really big topic. It's a really big issue, and unions need to stand up to that.
Thanks for raising that topic. It's great.
Yeah.
Another question here, please.
Thank you. My name is Lorraine Sibanda. I am from Zimbabwe and am the StreetNet International president. My question is twofold. I would like to know, what can trade unions do to provide an outlook that gives legal recognition as well as protection for informal economy workers? And the second one is, how can trade unions prevent further informalization of formal jobs? Thank you.
The informal economy. That's a very, very important. Who would like to talk about that? So there are a lot of informal workers in the
So we
shipping.
can talk about it from basically every transport sector,
Yeah.
and we see a move towards deregulated environment, market share, and free market forces. I think one of the things we're working really hard on, we'll be talking about that throughout the week, is urban transport, because it's also the question of the climate, and there's many precarious workers in urban transport. So we're having a conversation with anyone, even the World Bank, about how do we tackle those issues to respond. We're seeing lots of governments go to the World Bank, and we're saying you've got to have the human element in your projects, in your conversations, but you've got to have that conversation, and the same applies to automation. If there is to be changes, you've got to have an implementation path about how you give extra skills and extra opportunities. So for us, you have to organise the whole sector, and you have to make sure that there's a framework whichever way that works, whether you're self-employed or directly employed, or however, as part of any new model that comes into place. And we've had some very big success in Uganda on taxis and sort of privatised bus services about how to change that. But you have to have everybody in.
Walter, how are you reaching out to informal workers?
I mean, if you take a country like India, where 93% of the workers are in the formal sector, that's the normal. I mean, and what is the difference from so-called self-employed and an informal? Just to pay taxes. So basically, it's precarious work. There are different forms of precarious work, and the basic challenge is how to organize them. So to get them that they see value on organizing, on joining a union, joining an association, or whatever. Yesterday there was a very interesting panel hosted by FES here, and they were exactly discussing good practices that took place in a number of countries where they created, for example, associations that they then created a memorandum of understanding with an existing union, so to give union rights for their members. So there are creative ways, because that tends to be the new normal.
Yeah, I mean, Chrissy, I think when we talk about gig economy, and it might be a small section, but if you add all the informal workers, it's massive. The gig economy has existed forever, actually, right?
Right. I think that even when you look at the ILO Commission on the Future of Work, that's certainly one of the big topics under that umbrella, which is how do we move people from informal to formal, but then in addition, the question of, well, what rights should the informal economy have? Shouldn't there be a social platform? Shouldn't there be some basic social rights? How do we reorganize governments and social programs so that they capture the informal economy? And that's a big question for the future is there some ability to tackle that through, and it's got to be, I know we've worked a little bit with the informal people, the street vendors in India, who organize on a large scale to pressure the government to give certain Social Security entitlements. And we've worked with them somewhat. I think that that's a model, but it needs to be made bigger and more effective and wider application to all of the informal economy. And then also, how do you lift the informal economy into the formal economy is another big question.
I might mention, maybe you already know from the program, is that there's going to be a plenary this afternoon on the future of work.
Yeah.
So this is kind of like an intro, an amuse-gueule, as the French might say, about maybe some final comments, because we got like 3 minutes. We have a question back here? Let's do it. Can you airmail? What up? Thanks, John. I'm feeling like I think I picked the right box. I mean, we have quite a few over there that are quite relevant, but this panel is very relevant for this. All right. Question, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Shane Enright. I'm the Global Trade Union Advisor to Amnesty International, ex-ITF. And I just wanted to talk about the importance of broadening our right-based approaches to economic inequality, to communities beyond communities that are in work, to look at issues around social protection. Certainly in Amnesty International's analysis of the changing world, the growth of economic inequality and the concentration of economic power in the hands of a few is a major driver for the loss of rights across the board, not only employment rights, but health rights and a whole bunch of other rights. So I'm just here to say I want to make common cause with you and to make mischief with you. And I think we're going to see a real change in the attitude and the capacity of Amnesty International to partner with unions. And the final point is just to say Kumi Naidu, our new Secretary General, has made a message especially for delegates here, and it's been broadcast in this cafeteria.
Thank you, and I hope you raise that at the during the panel, during the plenary. Thank you. Cool, excellent. Can we have some? These, I guess, they serve as final comments as well. We got about 3 minutes left. Steve, please.
So for me, on the question of the future of work, no automation without negotiation, the same principles that, if you recall the movie On the Waterfront, those issues are as relevant today. Picking up people with an abuse of your power over them is no different. It doesn't matter which part of the world you're in. that's the same point. And the ITF, with their friends in the other govs, will take that fight with you.
Walter, please.
Yeah. Well, what I'd like to know to mention is that, the problem that we face, and I welcome the contribution to talk about inequality, because multinational corporations, they have too much power over governments, so that they make governments fit to their strategy, because they kind of blackmail the country, saying, if you don't give me what I want, I move my investment to another country. And and because they have so much power, they want the market to be unregulated. Because the basic question when we discuss future of work or present of work is, how are we going to share the benefits of it? If it's going to be only to the benefit of the top 8 white men that have equals the wealth of half of the population of the world, like Jeff Bezos, that have personal fortune 140 billion, like Bernard Arnault from Louis Vuitton, or Amancio Ortega, among the 8 richest men in the world, that have each $80 billion of personal fortune? Or are we going to share among the population of the world? That's the basic question that we want to discuss, and it's our role as union to make the share of the wealth.
Christy, it's the rights question is very relevant, isn't it?
I agree. Coming back to inequality as the center question as we move forward, how do we share the wealth? Where's the workers' seat at the table? We know as workers, as unions, we can negotiate solutions to almost anything that we're presented with as long as we've got some balance of power. We can reconfigure all kinds of things that are affected by technology, and we negotiate every day about changes in the work process and so on. But where you've got such an imbalance of power, it's not only inequality, income and wealth, which is beyond anything that we've seen in over 100 years right now, and headed in the wrong direction, and all the digital wealth that's being generated, recouped by only a handful of people. So we've got that on the one hand. On the other hand, increasingly imbalance of power when it comes to having a negotiating role and being able to negotiate the future. So those are 2 core principles of trade unions that we could have spoken about. This is a core principle of unions. We want to share in the wealth, and we also want to be able to bargain over our future, and I think those stay the same.
I think we wish we could continue on this, and tomorrow we'll continue during our lunchtime debates about unions fighting for the future, data, democracy, and dictatorship. Look ahead to those panels in English et en français aussi. On aura un panel en français. Thank you very much to our panel. Let's give them a big hand. Thank you to all of those who've been watching virtually in streaming, which we will stream tomorrow again as well. Thank you, and see you tomorrow.